Welcome back, guys. Now it's time to complete our final version of this ToDoist application, whatever we left in part 1. So if we take a look here, I have forked another copy called part 2. So the progress whatever we made up till the completion of part 1, I will be sharing with you another link of that code sandbox, and then the final completion with all the changes made, we'll share that link as separate one, so that you get you get one checkpoint in order to cross check whether you have been doing stuff correctly or not. All right, so these 3 tasks were completed, and the final one, it says that we have to render separate tasks from array as these separate cards. So what should we apply in order to take out individual elements from our array and use them? All right, I want you to think of something that will help us extract these individual components from this array so that we can make use of every single one of them. And if you remember correctly, the answer is the map method. So if I come below this, our array is called task A, then we'll apply the map method over this, and we know inside map we'll be able to make use of an arrow function, in which, since we have only one concerned attribute right now, or parameter rather, so this indi task is short for individual task. From this task array, we'll be taking these individual tasks, so we are basically looping through this array one by one. And then what we want is, okay, let me come here, we want to return a node component. All right, and inside this node component, as you can see, what we basically want is, we want the title to be equal to, let me put this inside these braces. So the title of this node, we want it to be equals to the title property of this object, and the content of this, we want it to be equal to the content property of this object. So remember, these individual elements that you have inside task A array, they are actually not simple variables or something. In here, if you can see, they are these objects, and inside these objects, for every individual separate card of single node, we want the title prop should be equals, not here, sure, the title prop to be equals to this title, and the content prop to be equals to this content right here. So let's tweak our node a little bit. Let's make use of props, and this hard coded, this is the title. Let's change it to props.title, and change this hard coded, this is the content, to props.content, like this. All right, and then we'll get rid of this separate node. Now, one thing you might be thinking, that why is this code not working? And the reason is because we are actually writing logic, and we need to wrap it inside these curly braces. And what else are we missing here? So I am returning this node. I think this is an extra, is it? No. Okay, let me, so this is finishing here, then I'm applying this here, and this task A. So let's see what is actually the issue here. We are using the map functionality, in this individual task, and we are making use of the arrow function. We have a return statement. Let's say if we wrap this. Okay, I think I found the problem. It is not because of this. Actually, we forgot to apply a closing bracket to this content here. And now here is, we are closing this. What is actually the problem here? Okay, it is angry for this. Dot value is not a function. Okay, I think it is working now. So we are applying the map method over this task A array, in which we are extracting every single individual object. We are naming it as indi task, and then while returning a custom node component, in which we are basically having this title, props.title is the h1 and props.content as the paragraph. We are passing them as props under the same name of title and content, and we are returning them for every single individual task. Alright, so I hope with this we should be able to complete the instruction or the task 1 of adding the implement node functionality. Let's give it a try whether we are able to successfully do this or not. So let's say we say title 1, and then we are writing some content here, and if I click this add button, you can see a separate node gets added. And if we try to look inside the inspect or the React developer tools, you'll be able to see inside node, these both props are filled. Inside create area, we are able to add these separately, and inside app, we'll be able to see that we have this stateful array which consists of one entry of this object, in which title is this and content is this. Alright, so the second task that is remaining is the implementation of delete node functionality. Now, if you head over inside node.jsx, inside this node component, you'll see if we have a look over this delete button. So actually, we want to make a call to a function as soon as this delete button gets clicked. Alright, so let's make use of the onClick method, and then we'll make another function called handleClick. Let's call our function handleClick like this, and the starting that we want to do is from this delete button. As soon as this button is clicked by someone, we are binding it to this handleClick function here. And inside our app component, since we have to ultimately delete the entries from this array, and this array is residing inside app component, let's create a delete task function inside our app component, which is receiving an ID called ID. So what is this ID? This ID is a unique signifier to point to which particular node are we willing to delete. Okay, and then we need to pass this function because we want this particular function to get called when this button is clicked. So first thing we need to do is we need to pass this function as a prop to every node that we have. So let's call this prop on delete, and we'll make it equals to delete task like this. And now if we head over inside here, first what we did was we passed over this delete task function, which we'll fill in a minute, as a prop called onDelete. So using props.onDelete, we'll actually be able to call this delete task function that is residing inside app component. So inside here, in order to make a call to that, we will call props dot on delete like this. Okay, and in order to further verify that by writing this props dot on delete, this delete task function is actually getting fired up, we can verify this by console logging it, delete button clicked. And now if I head over to our console, for example, if I added a task like this, and if we head over to our console and let's say we click this delete button, you can see this delete button clicked is appearing. So that means our code up till now is working just fine, and we are successfully able to call the delete function from the child component to its parent component. Okay, now the point is we don't want to simply log it. Instead, we want to delete that task from our array. So inside this delete task, let me get rid of this console log statement and let's remove this console log from here as well. What we want is, since we are working with this task array, we'll make use of the set task a setter in order to modify this task a, and inside this we'll make use of the previous value or the previous version of this array, and we know that we want to make use of the filter method. Now this filter method takes another function that will get hold of a task. Let's say I'm calling this a random task because we won't be needing this variable. Instead, we want to get hold of the index of the task that we are getting. So don't worry if this is getting very complicated. I'll explain this step by step, and then I want to return only those elements whose index is not equals to the index stored by this ID. So what this function is basically doing is I'm making use of this set task a setter. It is calling the previous value, which is actually the previous version of this task array, and over this previous version of this task array, that means the current version that we have right now, I'm applying the filter method. Now inside filter method, you can see the first one that we get here is the value, which means the value of these individual tasks, basically the ones that we were getting inside this map method like this. So these, okay, so in order to make a connection, let me call these individual tasks. So this is actually the same as this, and it is making use of these individual tasks, and along with this individual task, I have also an option to pass this index as a second parameter, and this will give me the index of the current task at hand, which means the first task will have the index 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. Okay, so the only thing left is we somehow need to pass over this index as ID, the index of the task that is to be deleted, from this node over to this app component. Okay, now inside our node, we actually require inside here, if you see in here, we actually require two attributes, a key and an ID. Okay, so we first actually need a key attribute, that is a required one, as we have discussed previously as a standard React practice, and we also need some sort of ID ID attribute that will be the identifier, which will help us identify the to be deleted task or the task that we want to delete. So if you see here, we were actually able to complete this one as well, because we were able to call this onDelete function, and we saw that by console logging it, it was actually getting fired up. The final thing is the usage of this filter method. So inside this app component, we can create this ID by the usage of UUID or something. But as we've seen previously, the simplest way is to make use of the index of these individual tasks and to point those, make this ID equals to the index. So remember, similar to this filter method as we have seen, we have an option of writing the second parameter as index, and it will point to the index of these individual tasks. Similarly, inside map method, we'll write the second parameter as index, and we'll make it equal to our key as well as our ID. Finally, what we can do is, if we head over inside note, okay, the point that is done, the final thing that is left is in here. While we were passing this onDelete function, initially we were actually simply calling it. Now we know that as a prop, we have an ID that will be a unique identifier of the current task at hand that I want to delete. So making use of this .id, I now have hold of the current index of this task, and then if it gets passed over to this delete task function, I will be able to successfully filter out only those entries whose index is not equal to the index stored by this ID. Okay, so I know this has gotten a little bit complicated right now, but let's try to see it from the very beginning. So in the delete functionality, we said that we want to delete this if I click this delete button. Okay, so that's why we made use of this onClick function, and we pointed this equals to a handle click function. And then inside app, we created a delete task. Why do we created this delete task inside app component? The reason is because the array from which these elements are to be deleted exists inside app component. We pass this delete task as a prop called onDelete, and we called it by the usage of props.onDelete, and we pass the props.id, and we know that this id is actually containing the current index of this element. Now once we get this id that is actually containing the index of the element which is to be deleted, we call this setter set task a. We apply this filter method to the current version of this array, and we are saying that we now only want those elements from the array whose index is not equals to this index sent over by node component. So now let's check this, whether this is working finally or not. And now if I click add here, and let's say if I write something like this, you can see if I click this delete button, okay, we have some issue right now. Let's see what this says. It is saying cannot read properties of undefined reading map. What problem are we facing now? Okay, we were actually making use of these individual tasks, and we were having this index here. So what is the problem with this? Cannot read properties of undefined reading map. Okay, let me see what the problem is. Right guys, I found the issue. Actually, it was not inside this map method. We forgot to add this return statement here. So when we were applying this set task and we were making use of this arrow function, so when we pass this as a parameter, and then here we actually need to return a statement, and this statement consisted of its own arrow function, right? So we don't need to worry about this. We forgot to add this here. And now if we head over to here and we try to add this task, it gets added as seen previously. And now if we hit delete, you can see it gets deleted successfully. So there's one last thing remaining that is actually left us, that is actually making this app not the perfect one. And it is, once we are clicking add, you can see that the input space and the content space, it is still filled with the initial entries. And we know how to do this. So first we head over to this create area, and we know that since these entries are actually consisted inside this task object, and ensure just before event.prevent default, we want to empty this task, because once you call this on add function, we actually want these entries to get pushed over to this array and be displayed as different cards. So what we will do is we will make use of this set task function, and in here this set task, we want the title to be empty, and we want the content to be empty as well. So once you do this, and if we try to refresh our application, now let's try to do this. For example, this is title 1, this is content 1, and now if I click add, the card is being created as before, but the title space and the content space is now cleared for another entry to be made. And like this, if you keep on adding, the different cards will be created, and the add and delete, both of these functionalities are working now. All right, time to show you. All right guys, so that was how we were supposed to complete the final version of this ToDoist application, and that was the solution. So this actually got really long, as you guys can see. Even though I tried to split this into 2 parts. The first one, we completed the 3 subtasks inside this, and in the second one we completed another subtask. But one thing, as I promised, you might have seen that we haven't used any single functionality or any single concept that we haven't seen in the previous sessions. Be it the map method, the filter method, the usage of props to pass down stuff from parent to their children, and the usage of functions as props in order to call these functions inside that parent component, from that children component, or from the child component. All of these have been covered in the previous sessions. So this was let's say a finale round in which we were able to make use of all those learnings in order to build our beautiful ToDoist application. And you will be able to share it with your family and friends and ask them for feedback regarding whatever we can do it further. So apart from this, in the next session, we'll be seeing in this ToDoist application only, see, in terms of functionality and behavior, it is almost completed, but we'll see something called React dependencies, or dependencies in React with respect to this ToDoist, and also we'll see some styling applied on this application of ours. So after the completion of this long session, I would say that will be all from my end. If you have any doubts, feel free to put them in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next session.